Okay. Hello and good evening, everyone from Bangladesh and wherever you are, based on your time zone. Greetings from Stand.earth and Oxfam in Bangladesh and BCWS. A very warm welcome to this webinar titled Building a Brand Roadmap to a Just Energy Transition for Bangladesh's Garment Sector. My name is Mohammad Imran Hassan, and I serve as the Head of Climate Justice and Natural Resource Rights at Oxfam in Bangladesh, and I will be facilitating and moderating today's session of this webinar. Thank you for joining. From different parts of the world, we are delighted to see such a strong participation from brands, policymakers, researchers, worker representatives, and civil society. Today's discussion comes at a very critical moment. Bangladesh is the second largest exporter of garments globally, yet also one of the most climate vulnerable countries. The garment sector sits at the heart of the intersection between climate risk, global supply chains, worker livelihoods, and energy transition. This event marks the launch of a new joint report developed by Stand.earth, Oxfam in Bangladesh, and the Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity, which is BCWS. The report sets out a fashion brand roadmap for a just energy transition. Grounded extensive consultations with workers, manufacturers, brands, and experts. Before we begin, a quick note on the format. We'll have a short presentations followed by moderated panel discussions and a question and answer. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We will take them during the panel. Let me briefly set the context. Bangladesh garment sector consumes around 30% of the country's industrial energy, with 90% still depend on fossil gas, while workers, predominantly women, face extreme heat, flooding, wage insecurity, and weak social protection. A just energy transition, therefore, cannot be only about decarbonization. It must also address power imbalance, financing gaps, responsible purchasing practices, and worker protections. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Oxfam partnership with Stand.earth in advancing climate justice and worker-centered transition, and to hand over to our colleague Rachel Kitchen, Senior Climate Campaigner at Stand.earth, to walk us through the report and its key findings. Rachel, over to you. Please take us through the goals, structure, and key recommendations of the roadmap. Over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. Just give me a moment while I attempt to share my slides. I hope that this is visible for everybody, and please let me know if not. So thank you. Great. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today for this session, sharing insights from the new report, which launches today, as well as some further discussion with our key experts and stakeholders from the garment industry in Bangladesh. In this short presentation, I will share an overview of the report's goals, methodology, findings, and recommendations, and finish with a quick look at where we go from here with a call to action for brands and for stakeholders. The purpose of today is to connect climate vulnerabilities and worker perspectives to underline the urgency of advancing a just energy transition and set out practical steps for brands, policymakers, and other groups to take action. But we also want to hear from the incredible wealth of knowledge in this virtual room. There will be opportunities to ask questions, receive answers directly in the chat using the Q&A function, as well as to propose questions for the panel discussion later in the webinar. And immediately following this session, you will also receive a short survey asking for your feedback and input. And we would truly value you taking a few minutes to fill it in and ideally, connecting with us afterwards and continuing the conversation. So what is the Bangladesh Brand Roadmap Report and what is its purpose? Stand.earth is a little background on us. Stand.earth is a North American environmental advocacy organization, which has for nearly a decade been advocating and campaigning for global fashion brands to set ambitious targets and take bold action to shift their supply chains away from fossil fuels supporting a clean energy transition in manufacturing regions. And that includes publishing the Fossil Free Fashion Scorecard, which is a benchmark of brand action. Over that time, we've seen more and more ambitious commitments from brands, but there is still a major implementation gap, particularly when it comes to financing, and there are real challenges remain against progress. Meanwhile, the runway to 2030 is getting shorter. Top-down commitments are just not enough to deliver an energy transition, let alone a just one. So Oxfam Bangladesh, BCWS are both incredible organizations with a deep understanding of the local context. And together we identified a shared opportunity to work to identify specific actions that would support the delivery of a fair phase out of fossil fuels in Bangladesh, with a focus on how brands could be the active partners. And briefly on the question of why Bangladesh, as I mentioned, Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable nations worldwide, but also the second biggest exporter of textiles and faces a specific combination of challenges to decarbonisation, which must be tackled together. Due to the central economic and employment role of the fashion industry, concerted partnership by brands has a unique opportunity to deliver for workers and contribute to wider grid decarbonisation. And there is a significant financing gap for the energy transition. Bangladesh requires up to 980 million US dollars annually to meet national renewable energy targets and an estimated $6.6 billion to decarbonize the apparel sector by 2030. Manufacturers operate on thin margins and bear disproportionate risk and pressure to meet environmental targets. They face high upfront decarbonisation costs, limited access to affordable finance, high import duties on renewable technologies, and volatile demand from buyers. Fashion brands have a due diligence responsibility to cease, prevent, or mitigate harm in their own supply chains. In the case of climate harm, acting on this responsibility means developing new systems of responsible supply chain partnership, which actively support and enable a just energy transition that does not disadvantage manufacturers or further harm workers. So over the course of the last year or more, our organizations have been consulting with key stakeholders in Bangladesh to develop the roadmap's findings and recommendations with a specific focus on worker representatives, manufacturers, as well as influential brands and retailers operating in the region. Over this period, we've consulted with over 100 garment workers, trade union representatives, and worker leaders across multiple factories. We consulted with 11 export-oriented manufacturing groups, both in person as well as through virtual meetings, including manufacturing groups of different sizes, large, medium, and small, to understand the distinct challenges and opportunities. In order to understand brands' position and challenges, we consulted with 5 major global brands through a combination of written questionnaire as well as one-to-one virtual meetings. And that set of core recommendations that are set out in the roadmap were then developed out of these consultations. They were also shared for peer review and feedback from key industry experts and stakeholders, including the Ethical Trading Initiative, Apparel and Textile Transformation Initiative, and the BGMEA. The discussions were designed to yield open sharing of challenges, opportunities, and ideas, and 4 main key themes were identified: climate adaptation planning and a worker-centric transition, equitable procurement practices and financing the just energy transition, and overcoming policy barriers. So a brief overview of the key findings before we move on to the recommendations themselves. So number 1 was that climate adaptation remains underfunded and underdeveloped despite a growing urgency. We found during the consultations that workers' biggest concerns focused on the serious health impacts that they were already experiencing as a result of heat stress, leading to sickness, dehydration, lower productivity, and wider socioeconomic implications for their communities. Worker protections during climate-related disruptions, including heat stress protocols, paid downtime during disruptions, or income protection, were found to be inconsistent or absent. Stakeholders repeatedly highlighted that cost is an issue. Most brands lack formal country-specific climate adaptation policies. Where adaptation is acknowledged, it is often framed as a future risk rather than a current operational challenge, resulting in limited investment and weak accountability mechanisms. Secondly, that unfair purchasing practices offload climate risk onto suppliers and onto workers. Short-term contracts, price pressure, last-minute order changes undermine suppliers' ability to plan, invest, or absorb climate-related costs required to meet emission reduction targets. Manufacturers are routinely expected to make investments in infrastructure related to energy efficiency or renewable energy adoption without corresponding adjustments to pricing or timelines. Workers expressed fear that without transitioning to renewable energy and meeting carbon emission reductions targets set for factories, buyers may cancel orders, leading to widespread job losses. Number three, that the lack of accessible fair financing is a critical obstacle to progress. New non-debt-based financing mechanisms are essential to make decarbonisation viable for small and medium-sized businesses. Stakeholders emphasized that without grant-based, pooled, or collective financing supported by brand investment, a fair and equitable transition will not reach the scale required at the pace that is necessary. Existing financial mechanisms rely heavily on loans, increasing supplier debt exposure and excluding smaller companies with limited access to financial resources. Manufacturing groups also cited bottlenecks with loan processes that can further slow approvals and access to capital. Financing was consistently cited as the most significant constraint to decarbonisation. The upfront costs of renewable energy, electricity, and energy efficiency remain prohibitive, particularly for small and medium-sized factories. And then number four, that structural policy barriers limit climate action and disincentivize energy adoption by manufacturers. So both manufacturing groups and brands pointed to structural barriers, such as import duties on solar technology and energy-efficient machinery, restricting the adoption of renewables. The current national grid infrastructure, where the cost of producing low-carbon electricity at the factory level is high, creates an uneven playing field. Other infrastructure barriers identified include the cost and process of land acquisition for setting up renewable energy technologies, as well as land use permissions for outside spaces. Manufacturing groups underscored the current implementation gap, where policy exists but are not effectively enforced, or there is an absence of a centralized government body to oversee and coordinate energy and transition efforts. After I've finished this short overview, Kalpona and Vidya Amrit of the BGMEA will share more details on the worker and industry perspectives of the impact of top-down decarbonisation policies and climate impacts and the need for a just transition. But I wanted to note here that one of the key findings that emerged from this process was real clarity that each of these issue areas have deep implications for workers and manufacturers, and that without a funded, holistic, just transition approach, top-down climate policies can have unintended consequences, which may increase the downward pressure on wages, consolidate climate financing among larger and better resource manufacturers, and have negative implications for small and medium-sized businesses. Holistic brand support in the form of financial investment, equitable sourcing, and policy advocacy is needed urgently. And this roadmap and its recommendations are designed to act as a clear call to action for brand responsibility. I will briefly go into the recommendations, but there is much more detail available in the report itself, which we'll provide a link to in the chat. But overall, what this study highlighted is that there is no single one-size-fits-all solution for different geographic regions and supply chains, but that the climate transition plans must be locally specific, must be robust, inclusive, and funded in order to deliver on just energy transition principles. And it's our overall recommendation that brands sourcing from Bangladesh must publish this kind of just energy transition plan, which is robust, inclusive, and funded, in order to provide deep accountability into the work that they will be moving forward. So some quick recommendations here. In more detail, we have to create and publish specific locally developed and funded adaptation policies, which should be developed in partnership with local stakeholders and using just transition principles. So funding, key policies identified included funding that should be allocated on a per order basis to support co-financing of appropriate climate adaptation policies, such as saline solution and adaptation infrastructure inside facilities. Health insurance for workers was identified as a priority, which should be both co-financed or provided with brand and manufacturer support, as well as advocated for as a national priority. Outside of the factory environment, workers are still highly impacted by climate change, with little recourse if it impacts their ability to work. Climate initiatives in the community need to be included in adaptation plans in partnership with local organizations or trade unions. Number two is to adopt responsible procurement policies which rebalance financial risk and enable manufacturer investment in decarbonisation and reducing worker vulnerability. It's been well established that price remains the deciding factor in brand supplier relationships. But in the course of these consultations, brands did acknowledge that there may be a need to strategically consider the long-term consequences of shockwave events, such as COVID-19, exposing the vulnerabilities of supply chain, and how shockwave events and purchasing practices may improve long-term stability in events like climate-related impacts. So for brands to show real climate leadership, they must make definitive commitments to increase transparency and accountability of their procurement policies, rebalancing the risks of climate investment and climate impacts more fairly. This includes long-term contracting and policies that support workers during periods of climate-related shutdown. Number three is to pay a fair share for decarbonisation and efficiency costs. This includes establishing consultation processes with different types of manufacturers to evaluate different financial models, taking into account the type, size, and capacity of factories. To engage in collective shared and grant-based sustainability project financing, which moves beyond capacity building and feasibility studies. And to provide transparency through annual data on the dollar amount of investments in country-specific supply chain sustainability initiatives. It's essential that all of these initiatives are transparent and accountable. And then number four is to support national governments to address key climate and adaptation policy gaps. So policy support for national and international regulation is essential to increase the scope of brands' impact and support a level playing field. And I won't go into all of these issues right now, but essentially kind of building on the issues identified earlier in the report, issues like worker insurance, worker protection, and then the development of pooled financing are essential pieces. We also identified that, of course, brands can't take action alone, and brands do not exist in a vacuum, and identified key recommendations for policymakers, both at a national and international level. For key implementation partners, such as the International Accord or RSC, where the involvement of the RSC can reduce, avoid repetition and overlap in inspections, incorporate climate accountability into existing infrastructure, and while limiting the additional burden for manufacturers. And recommendations for the UN Fashion Charter. We recognize the UN Fashion Charter as a key fast mover for brands and manufacturers, but with blind spots, as recognized in the Charter communique released at COP30 recently, where climate adaptation and financing need to be specifically incorporated into charter plans. and transition plans required by the Charter need to be published independently to enable accountability. So just to close out, this is really our call to action and the beginning of a longer conversation that we want to have with brands and with other stakeholders. But for Stand.earth, we believe that the next steps are clear. Our call is for brands to engage with us, to have these conversations both with Stand, with Oxfam, with BCWS, and to begin by publishing these just energy transition plans, which include commitment to financial resources, the increase in transparency, and public engagement in advocacy positions. And just to finish out, this QR code links directly to download the report. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have comments, questions, please put them in the chat, or please do engage in the survey that you will receive at the end. And I've included my email on there, so you can reach out to me directly if you wish to connect with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for clearly laying out for the urgency and the responsibility that brands carry in enabling just energy transition. And as you have mentioned that the report was consultative and it consulted for all the parties involved. And definitely the report is deeply grounded in lived experience. So to bring these realities into the room, I now invite Kalpana Akhtar, founder and executive director of Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity. Kalpana will share insights from workers and communities on how climate impacts energy transition pressures and purchasing practices are already shaping daily life, income security, and health. Over to you, Kalpana.
Thank you so much, Imran Bhai, and thank you all of us for this report. Congratulations. And I hope that people read it and give us whatever feedback they have. My perspectives definitely will be from the worker side. First of all, all these are very new words for workers. Just transition, energy, green energy or decarbonization. Everything goes top of their head because our workers are fighting for their basic wages. They're fighting overtime. They're fighting safe workplace. They're fighting for union rights. And then all this coming, and they're thinking that why this is happening to me? Just transition or this energy we're talking about, it is nothing that tomorrow. It is already yesterday. It is happening now. But the workers are not aware about it. It's not even said that who is responsible to let them know why all this happening, like in hot summer, why they're facing this heat stress, or why they are facing this heavy rainfall and their house like under the water or their roads are underwater. Who should be taking care of all these? Why there is no resources for them to tackle? Like for one worker, if I state in her voice, she was saying that I couldn't sleep in. She has 2 children, so she lives in a tin shed house, which is 10 feet by 10 feet, and she was saying that my work shift was like more than 10 hours. I already lost my whole energy because it was heat. And then we were in the factory. We were in the summer. We were making like winter clothes. It was a padding jackets that we were making. And then I came home, and after 1 hour, there is no electricity. And it is not happening like one day. It is happening every single day. There is no electricity that I can have a sound sleep with my children. And that heat stress making our children to have some sort of diseases. Now we know that name of scabies. So it is kind of an itchy thing was happening in their bodies. So what she had to do, she had to run to a couple of her relatives for some loan. And she ended up getting 25,000 taka and then install a backup electricity, like a solar panel, backup electricity, so she can at least sleep with her children. So my whole point is, first of all, she doesn't know that why it's happening, and there is no fund, there is no ring fund, ring fest fund that can help her or help him or help workers during this time. We don't have any particular policy to protect workers during this time, because it's all, as I said, that it is nothing new that happening, or the country like waiting, or manufacturers that waiting, or just transition or energy problem that is coming, will deal with that. It is nothing there. So the brands and retailers, they knows, because this it is coming from them, that this decarbonization needed to happen. The country, they knows it is happening now. We don't have adequate policy on that, and manufacturers, they might be starting with something, but the problem is there is a no cost contribution as well from the brand side, rather just saying that, oh, you need to fix this or you need to fix that. Let alone that how workers will be dealing with that. So this is like, situation for workers is, and what is needed to be done. First, a very clear message to the workers. The information need to be downstream. It should not be in the bubble anymore. That we'll be discussing in here, and worker doesn't know who are the main sufferer. They doesn't know that what exactly happening. So they need to know that what happening, why happening, and what is the policy and protection for them, and who is taking care of that. It is only the manufacturer's responsibility, or it is only the government responsibility, or it is brand's responsibility to make a fund, to make the resource available so workers can get there and fight whatever they are facing. I think we already have, throughout the years, like since we have business in the country, or since we have workers, those are working in the industry, having the prescription that we need to do these and that, I think we had enough. Okay, so now it is a time to stop the barbecue party, making my country dirty, and says that, oh, it is your responsibility to clean it. No, come on, brands, step up, come and take some responsibility. You enjoy the bigger piece of the pie, and it is time to do some contribution to make life easy for those who makes you profit. So take care of workers together. Fix your purchasing practice the way it is needed. Don't just come with a prescription. Don't just give a top-down, suggestion that you need to do this and that. Come, sit together, make every policy worker-centric, have their voice on that, and then we can see the changes. I wanted to stop here, and I can answer, further when you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana, for grounding this conversation in the voices of workers, especially women. Definitely, workers are the one who are subject to, multiple burden, because they are the community who had a good life in the rural setup, and the climate change actually impacted them and forced them to migrate to the urban setup. And you described what is their living condition, how vulnerable their life is in the informal settlements. And definitely, we should bring up the concept of distributional justice as in different parties involved. And definitely, one of the strong stakeholders is the manufacturer. So, as the report consulted with the manufacturer as well. So, I would like to invite Vida Amrit Khan, Vice President, BGMEA, to share perspective from manufacturers, including challenges around financing, renewable energy adoption, and expectation from brands and policymakers. Over to you, Vida.
Thank you so much, Imran. As you said rightfully, my name is Vidya Amrit Khan. I'm the Vice President of BGMEA. My portfolio essentially includes all matters, the big umbrella of sustainability. And I am also the Deputy Managing Director of Desh Garments Limited, Bangladesh's first 100% export-oriented ready-made garment factory. So it's my legacy. And I feel that my relationship and my duty, my allegiance to this industry is far greater than me just being a manufacturer. The word, the climate action, just transition, essentially what I understand throughout the concept of just transition is that it is not just something that I would do in-house in my factory, but more of a community effect, a collaborative hand-holding result and outcome that has to come not only from the manufacturer, but from the brand, from the government, from every stakeholder, and eventually helping improve the lives of the workers in whatever way. And in this situation, it's decarbonization, it's the environmental targets, and all of that. You know, Bangladesh is a signatory of the UNFCCC climate action. We are signatories of the Paris Agreement. We have very strong targets of increasing let's start with this number. We have targets of increasing our renewable energy usage in manufacturing to 30% by 2030. This is 2026. We're almost halfway there, almost, and we're at 4%. So how, and 57 renewable energy farms contracts were cancelled when the interim government came into power. We all know that in Bangladesh. So as far as the environmental targets mandated by the brands go, of course, one key factor is to have more renewable energy in the manufacturing process. As you know, Bangladesh has the highest number of green factories in the world, and I think the number one highest numbered green building in Bangladesh, in the world, is in Bangladesh. However, a green building improves lives, makes a factory ventilation better, cooler, sturdier, and all of that, but it doesn't essentially guarantee a greener manufacturing process. So there's a difference. One is I house myself in a better building, and the other is that my entire process is more green. So when we talk about the decarbonization, it's currently, right now in Bangladesh, what we are trying to work on, and I'm also in the government committee, I'm the sole private sector representative, we are working on the service level agreement between the private sector renewable energy farms that will produce energy and essentially sell to the manufacturers. What we are in discussion with Bangladesh Power Grid, Bangladesh policy, there's a difference between those who make the policy and those who actually operate the power grid. So under the circumstances, we are now looking at wheeling charges. We are making sure that the wheeling charges are kept lowest, that they're made competitive, to make sure that, and here is where the brands can essentially help and countries can help, is to be the voice and all have the same voice as BGMEA, saying that you cannot just increase the price of renewable energy while the grid is being used, because then that doesn't really help anyone. We want competitive energy at the end of the day. So it's a lot of policy level discussions. The government obviously thinks that we are going to eat away from their supply and demand game, but at the end of the day, the government isn't producing enough renewable energy. And the only way that we think that we can intervene and overcome this situation is by having this private sector initiative. So that's one issue that we are working on. There are always, under these circumstances, people who are pro, and there are people who are against the whole drive. But the idea is that, hammering one idea into their heads, that is 30% by 2030, we really need to get there. Because if I look at my neighboring countries, Nepal, India, China, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Laos, all of them have more renewable energy than we do. So that's something that we have to think about. And then, of course, the brands mandated, well, as Kalpana said, as far as the responsibility of the brands go, it's a question of sharing that responsibility. And no other better way to share something than, look at it from a price point of view. So either you are sensitive to the increase of cost of production in Bangladesh and you reward us by paying us more. But unfortunately, in the last decade, prices have just gone down every year. Or you directly invest through a grant or something like that with the factory, so that we can put up enough solar power plant, rooftop energy plants within the factory, and then have the batteries to back up that energy. 1 megawatt costs about $800,000-900,000, so it's really nothing. And if you think at the end of the day, I think the proof is in the pudding, because you hear about, giant-sized brand companies that are turnovers of 24 billion, 42 billion, and then you have we celebrate and we applaud when we know that this one factory has actually turnover of 1 billion in Bangladesh. I mean, there's probably like 5 factories who do that. So you can easily weigh in the responsibility, the money that's being made by the brands, and then we are inundated with obligations, compliance, safety standards, living wages, just transitions, renewable energy. But then you have to talk the talk and you have to walk the walk. You can't tell us to do it and then not take responsibility, because at the end of the day, yes, of course, Bangladesh is a country that will start or has started to prioritize renewable energy and all the other greener energies. But at the end of the day, I think within the EU, you're under a direct obligation and a set of rules and regulations under which perhaps if all the regulatory factors kick in, then the amount of imports you can do from a country that is not using enough renewable energy is something that needs to be revisited. So brand engagement has to be in the form of grants. This is not something that should be adjustable. They should very much take a part in the process of how we do things, and why not, really? At the end of the day, you do a conversion, it almost really costs nothing when you look at it from a Bangladeshi point of view. Financing in Bangladesh, of course, as we all know, Bangladesh Bank has financing schemes which are for green financing for, all kinds of wellness to workers. Housing is also one of them. There are special loans at lower interest rates. There's ITCOL, which is another wing of the government, whereby they do better financing and easier financing for green projects. And Bangladesh government has an overall umbrella kind of policy that if you do a green factory building or a green investment, then your interest rate is almost 1/3 of what the normal interest rate would be. So having said all of that, 5 minutes I've taken up more than what I'm allowed, but this subject is endless. And if you want me to summarize, I will say this, that the financing exists, but even within Bangladesh, there's a lot of red tape and hurdles. Maybe I can get a loan, but maybe an SME can't, a small medium enterprise can't. So there's a challenge there. Looking at how there's gender imbalance in how it's not written, but it's in practice how gender related financing schemes are given. If I were to ask for a loan and my brother were to ask for a loan, it would be treated differently only because I'm a woman. And as far as decarbonization goes within the country, we are working on it. There's a lot of support from the government. There's a lot of support from those who make the policy. But then those who buy and sell the grid and use the grid just to deliver electricity to us is a little bit different. So, fingers crossed, at the end of the day, we have to work towards what we have to work towards to make the lives of our workers better. And it's as simple as that, because it's common sense. You can't work when it's too hot, or you can't work when you can't sleep because the government hasn't given you electricity when you go back home after long days of work. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Vidya Khan. And thank you to all of our speakers for those insightful reflections. And that marks the end of this session. Now we're going to jump to our second session, which is a panel discussion. So welcome to the panel discussion of this webinar. This is where we bring together perspective from workers, academia, and industry to reflect on what a just energy transition should look like in practice, and what must change to make it real. So at the beginning, let me just introduce our distinguished panelists. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for the session. First, Kalpana Akhtar, we have already heard, but we want more from you. She's the founder, executive director of Bangladesh Center for Worker Solidarity. And then second, we have Professor Sharmin Nilormi from Jahangirnagar University, whose research focuses on climate change, gender, and development. And then again, we have Vidya Khan, Vice President, BGMEA, who will share insights on the realities faced by factory owners and suppliers navigating decarbonization pressures. So thank you all for joining the panel. So I will pose two guidelines questions to the panel, and same questions to all the panelists. And you'll have 3 minutes for to answer to each of the questions. So let's begin. And for the participants who joined, you can drop your questions in the chat. So we'll navigate through. So the first questions I would like to ask to Sharmin Nilormi from Jahangir University. The question is like responsible and climate-aligned purchasing practice are repeatedly highlighted in the report that we're launching today. So how do current brand purchasing practices shape decarbonization outcomes, and what is the single most important shift you would like to see to support a just energy transition in Bangladesh's garment sector? Over to you,
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you. And to let you know, all the statements by Kalpana Akhtar and Vidya Amrit Khan, I stand by those. It's not who are telling on behalf of whom. It's the Bangladesh whom we need to prioritize, and everybody has their shares here, and we all work together to make a journey towards prosperity. And in 2 days we are having an election, and Bangladesh's priorities now goes beyond recovery. So we had been struggling towards recovery, but we need to go to prosperous and purposeful growth. The first priority is to lock in macroeconomic stability while avoiding the trap of prolonged stagnation. The most challenging factor is employment scale and youth engagement, trade, LDC graduation, and global positioning. It's not only global, but the regional positioning as well. As Bangladesh approaches LDC graduation in November 2026, we are expecting that to happen. Trade policy is no longer a technical afterthought. It is becoming a central arena where the future growth path will be determined. Graduation is definitely an achievement, but it removes a protection layer that supported export success to decades. And preferential access will fade. And we all know that Bangladesh's policy had an anti-export bias. It's more towards import bias, but we have an anti-export bias policies that we need to understand. But the very thing you have asked me, one priority area, I want to say that the private sector in the policies must get stronger voices, like NAPA, National Adaptation Plan of Action. You can see a list of actions, but the interventions, but the engagement with private sector is very marginal. You can say NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, that we have communicated to UNFCCC process, and there we say that by 2035 we will reduce our emission unconditionally by 6.3 or 6.5%, and with conditions, meaning with technological transfer assistance and financial assistance, around 13 to 15%. So to get into that, for example, Green Climate Fund have a private sector facility where we can easily get into to access climate finance, having very concessional loan near about 1%, that too for 30 years or 40 years loan tenor. And we hardly tried that. So we completely relied on public sector investment to get access to climate finance. I'm telling it on top of what Kalpana Appa and Vidya already said. So everything said by them, I stand by that. Having said that, I think we need to make things ahead to get prepared ourselves, how to get climate finance and at scale. It's not small scale, 10 to 25 million or like that. We can hatch. There's no cap, even billion. And another thing, if you go through NDC, you don't see government sector, RMG, where we earn more than 80% of our export. But energy is there. And we are producing renewable energy, actually solar energy. So why don't we cluster those energy, production? We have lands in some areas where government can deploy it for renewable energy production. And Vidya already mentioned that we have provisions with Bangladesh Bank. We have provisions with technology with each call. So we have mechanism in hand. So government can deploy land, government can lease out land to private sector and facilitate the production factors. And if that is going to grid and the government sector are using that, that is already an advantage for government sector to be competitive. So there are some internal, issues we need to think differently. But parallelly, I must say, the advocacy is not only within Bangladesh government. It's about justice, and Paris Agreement calls for economy-wide emission reduction. So we have a preference as LDC. So every state, every country has to, reduce their emissions. So we are producing textile, we are generating carbon, and other developed country markets, the consumers are using that. So how we are going to measure that carbon emission, and that's a complex things to calculate.
Thank you, Professor.
And then tariff, and that's a part of negotiation from ourselves and understanding that. On that understanding, we need to advocate with North America, with European Union, and also with bilateral buyers, what Vietnam did.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Professor.
there are other issues, macroeconomic issues. I'm not an insider, but as a macroeconomic, as a citizen of Bangladesh, what I understand that we need to get ourselves prepared for some other avenues, international avenues, that can be available, and we have that capacity to absorb. And parallelly, the international advocacy, very consciously designed advocacy must be going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We'll be coming back to you again with the second questions. So now I would like to move to Kalpana Appa for the same questions. Should I repeat, or you can go on?
Thank
You're on mute.
you for this chance. And thanks for Professor for sharing her thoughts. I'll try to be brief because I already spoke. So, I see this in a 5-way that how this should be moving forward. One is that paying for the transition, it is very important, okay? The brands must share the real cost of this decarbonization, renewable energy investment, energy efficiency upgrades, and just, the transition cost, rather like pushing the pushing the suppliers and workers for lower prices. I think the brands has to move from that. So that's the first thing. Second is a long-term and predictable sourcing. Then, multi-year commitment needed. It's not like you are coming with a 3 months order and you are saying that, oh, you need to change these. No. A multi-year commitment is needed for that. The third is no transition at workers' expenses. So workers should not lose their jobs when we talk about decarbonization, when we talk about renewable energy. It is all here nice, but worker job has had to be protected, and in the same time, their workload should not be increased. Like, to make the cost efficient, the worker should not make 200 pieces of garment when they can only make 120 pieces. So that should not be happen. So just transition means that job security, income protection, and reskilling workers. So that is really, we all have to be considered. The fourth I consider is a workers' voice in the climate decision. It is not somebody will be talking for them from somewhere. Like, we are in a forum now, we are talking. The decision should not be happen in the way city and workers do not have any clue that what exactly happening. Let them bring in the decision-making process and get their voices. That is important. Not only inform them, but also given them access that they can talk. So that is important. And last, that align the purchasing, with labor rights and climate justice. So when you are doing purchasing, it should not be just how you're gonna put forward the prices or when you will be receiving your goods. It is more like talk about freedom of association. It's more about talking about workplace safety. It's more talking about living wages. Go beyond the minimum wages. It's talking about social protection. And definitely a adaptation fund, it is needed, or where that workers can access to as a ring-face fund whenever they need it. So I wanted to stop with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. So I'm going to go to Bida Amit Khan for the same question. So please let me know whether I need to repeat the question or you can go on.
If you could repeat it, please.
Okay, thank
Very
you.
briefly.
The question was like, responsible and climate-aligned purchasing practices are repeatedly highlighted in the report that has been published today. So how do current brand purchasing practices shape decarbonization outcomes? And what is the single most important shift you would like to see to support a just energy transition in Bangladesh's garment sector?
You see, the whole problem, well, not the whole problem, but one of the main problems in this whole conversation is this, that we're talking about brands who promote love and are in the business of fast fashion. Whether you talk about circularity, recycling, decarbonization, just transitions, these are initiatives that talk about bringing in, whether it's social or physical or mental, hierarchy and consciousness while we produce the garments that we have to produce for the West. Now, we are being hammered by the brands to do certain things. Let's put cost aside. Needless to say, it should be shared. I mean, why should I take the burden at the end of the day fully? And to be honest, there are great brands, and we must also mention the good brands like H&M, Bestseller, Inditex, of course, Celio, Primark. There are brands who everybody knows about, the same names that we keep hearing, who are conscious and they want to do something that is better for everyone. I agree with Kalpana and also Sharmin in what they have said. But over here, I think when we talk about fast fashion and the fast fashion brands, what are they trying to do? When we look at Shein, with all the stories that we hear, should be a brand that should be sort of, microscopic level investigations should be done into what their ethical standards are, what kind of factories they produce from, and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, it's cheaper. Decarbonization, just transition, recycling, everything is expensive. It increases costs. Whether you want to talk about costs in the long run or the short run, or how slowly the rewards would come in, the question is, today I need money to make solar panels on my rooftop, right? It's not tomorrow. I'm not looking at the 20 years return on my investment at reducing my energy costs. So it's about now. And when we are talking about the fast fashion industries, and I don't want to single out Shein, They're good and bad. Somebody can argue that with the volume that they do, they create employment. So there are good and bad arguments everywhere. But the thing is that but at the end of the day, what do we want? Cheaper, 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 cheaper. Long time ago, almost 20 years ago, no, not 20, but 15 years ago, VF Corporation did a documentary and a study on analyzing what happens to the garments that they ship out by air or they discount us for when we delay by a month or even by 3 days by catching the next vessel. Nothing. 60% of that shipped out air or discounted product goes to a warehouse, stays in a shelf. And this whole discount mentality that I will bring in something and give 90% discount is what further drives the price down. So, at the end of the day, maybe the brands want us to do certain things because of regulatory factors, and maybe they have a conscience. At the end of the day, we're being bombarded and we all have to do it because we want to produce for the West, right? And then comes the customer who just wants something cheaper, 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 cheaper. They have very little knowledge, very little awareness, very little consciousness of the impact of getting a better deal. So I think the customer here, the majority of the customers here are in the dark. Yes, it's fashionable to go to secondhand shops. Yes, it's fashionable today to see, a box in the CNA stores in Germany where you can drop your secondhand garments, and then there is like reclaimed fashion and all that kind of stuff. 20 years ago, we used to call it vintage. When you picked out a Chanel, for example, from a vintage store. But the whole idea is this idea of a bargain, and customers don't want to pay more. And therefore, when the overall general customer, who are now young people who are supposed to have better consciousness by being Gen Z and the rest of it, they don't know
I would
enough.
request you to, short it a
So,
little bit.
so
Okay.
consciousness of the customer, and then of course shared responsibility between the brand and the manufacturer. But I think the consciousness of the customer has to massively increase, and they shouldn't look for something that's just cheaper, because everybody's going to talk about living wages, but then you're going to come in and slash the price. And then how am I supposed to pay the living wages? It's not possible. Or even on-time wages. It's not possible anymore. It's difficult. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you. We are at the second question, but for the interest of time, and I think it has come up already in your conversation. So I'd request you to be very brief, maybe within 1.5 minutes max. So the question is like, the financing remains the biggest bottleneck for sure. So what should be the scope and structure of a national or global financing mechanism for a just energy transition? Who should pay and what should it pay for? So maybe very briefly, within 1.5 minutes. So over to Professor Shamin.
So it's not one way. And I have already said that we can keep continuing telling that, West must pay, but we need to prepare ourselves for the realities. So it's ourselves who needs to be prepared, financing, mobilization internally and also within the international area that we need to explore. And there are windows of opportunities that we can have. I think we need to build capacity. We need to build capacity of the private sector as well as good coordination with the government windows who coordinate these. For example, ERD, for example, the direct access entities, and this collaboration can get the financing done along with the brands, you are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm moving to Kalpanappa.
Yeah, I would say the brand must be the primary contributor of the financing, because they control the price, lead time, and profit. Like for decades, they have been benefited for low-cost labor. I don't want it to say cheap cost, cheap labor. It is like low-cost labor, fossil fuel-based production. So they have benefited out of all these. So it should not be just government and supplier. who should take all responsibility alone. But in the same time, I would say that we just don't need the solar panels in our factory floor. We need our voice protection, job security, and real voice, in the changing, in the transition. When I say real voice, that means workers' voice needed to be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. So over to Vidya Amit Khan.
So we need government policies and incentives for those who become more decarbonization. People want to have to invest because of an incentive that they might get, or tax rebates, either or. Government needs to change policy on the taxation of, for example, something like solar panels, which is still very high in Bangladesh. If you want to encourage people to invest in renewable energy, the government has to make zero tax on those solar panels. I mean, like, why wouldn't you? Foreign funding and grants coming into Bangladesh should be flexible. There should be flexible mechanisms. We all know that Bangladesh Bank has stringent laws on financing and finances and taxation that comes in from Bangladesh. That's something that needs to be looked at. If I take money from a local bank at an interest rate, the interest rate should be competitive, and there has to be longer payback periods. It cannot be that I take out the loan and 6 months later I have to start paying it back, because I don't get return on ROI that easily in a solar panel when I put it up on my rooftop, or any other energy, for example. So access to low-cost funds in general, and then access to finance for small, medium enterprises. That's almost a no-go area for the small, medium enterprises in Bangladesh. A lot of red tape, a lot of forms that have to be filled out, which are completely unnecessary and so dated that it just makes the process more complicated. And then, of course, access to finance for women. Women in Bangladesh need the permission of a man as a guarantor, or needs a guarantor who's a man. I mean, like, what if what if I have nobody in this whole world? I'm alone. Can I not get a fund if there's no man backing me up? Like, what kind of rule is that in 2026? So, gender financing and the limit that is allowed for gender in Bangladesh, if I take out from a regular bank in Bangladesh, is quite limited in its way. So, that has to be there. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's not just a question of, okay, complaining that, oh, my brand hasn't paid me. Of course, it's nice if my brand does pay me, and the brand should feel responsible to pay me. But at the end of the day, what if they don't? My country should offer my country should offer financing schemes that are friendlier, easier, incentivized, and phase zero taxation when it's something good that I'm trying to do for the environment and for the betterment for the citizens of Bangladesh who are my workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. We have a couple of questions from the chat. So I think for the interest of time, we'll not be able to take all the questions. So I'm going to read out some of them. Maybe from the panelists, if you're interested to answer, you can. So the first question, Vietnam is one of our key competitors. So our Vietnam is demanding the same level of support from brands or buyer. If not, why are we placing additional pressures on our own manufacturers by asking for more support from brands? Could this be one of the key reasons behind the decline in orders? So this has been.
No, I don't think so. I think the basket of goods which Vietnam produces and the basket of goods that Bangladesh produces is very different. Vietnam did surpass or match the same exports of Bangladesh just 1 year in the middle of COVID. And I think the volume per orders that we do is different. But it is interesting to look at Vietnam's policies because it's a landlocked country. And at the end of the day, it has done wonders. And their recycling industry, I know, is amazing. So they have more renewable energy than Bangladesh also. So it's a country to look at to understand how better we could do things. But it is not a country that we should look at and get scared that my orders are going to go away. Because I think, like I said, the basket of goods is different.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we are very close to, actually, we're over past 5 minutes, so we're not going to be asking any more questions. Thank you all the panelists for your insightful thoughts. So I'm now gonna move to this last part. So I'm gonna hand it over to Rachel for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Imran Bhai, and please do also feel free to offer your own closing remarks. For me, I just want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists and speakers for sharing your expertise and your insights, both throughout this report process and today. And thank you everybody who has joined us today in the audience as well. And please do share your feedback, questions, and further input through the survey, and continue to reach out to us that way, please. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And from Oxfam, from Stand.earth and BCWS, we're very pleased to have you here. And thank you for all the participants, all the panelists to bring out such insightful, discussions in the room. And definitely, when we talk about the finance is one of the really important pillar of just energy transition and distributing the benefits of the just energy transition to the right set of people, and definitely in our cases, the workers. So we have to vouch for that we should provide the right set of support to the workers so that the energy transition doesn't bring fear to them, but instead of fear, it actually brings benefits to them. And definitely for the financing, from our perspective, we should have some sort of business model that would support the industries or all the parties for a just energy transition. Because at the end of the day, if we don't put the just word, then it's simply energy transition, and the community, the people, specifically the workers, they will be subject to another set of burden. So definitely we don't want that. We want a just energy transition, by the responsive participation by all the parties involved in this energy industry sector. So thank you all. Thank you for your active participation, and definitely we look for a beautiful future on energy transition. I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you. Bye.